want to really challenge you on some different notions about the criminal justice system. Just quickly, a show of hands. Curious, how many of you have heard how the criminal justice system is broken? Okay, so it's something that's kind of out there in the media. So those of you that showed your hands, though, how many of you actually believe that the criminal justice system is actually broken? Okay, so most of you, I think, raise your hand again. So what I want to tell you is that from my personal and professional experience, I feel the criminal justice system is not broken. And in fact, it's actually doing exactly what it was intended to do, which is to oppress and marginalize certain communities. So I'm going to show you some graphs and some information that kind of back that up. So my presentation is restoration through incarceration. And we are living in the era which is now commonly known as mass incarceration, where we have currently over 2.2 million people incarcerated in this country. We have less than 5% of the world's population, and yet we hold more than 25% of the world's prisoners. We lead the country in incarceration. That is kind of like our claim to fame here in the United States of how we are allegedly better than other countries. We are the leaders in incarceration. And we spend vast amounts of money on an annual basis. If you look at this graph, you can see there's been an exponential increase from 1985, where we spent approximately $6.7 billion, to more present day, over $50 billion in 2015. And present day, bring it up now, we spend over $80 billion annually on incarceration. That's across the nation, which is just a phenomenal amount of money that is going to marginalizing people, protecting society to an extent, but also keeping people away from their families and being able to become productive citizens. So Brian Stevenson talks about how our criminal justice system is able to treat people better if you are rich and guilty than if you are poor and innocent. And that is just a travesty of justice. So wealth, not culpability, is a driver in our criminal justice system today. So people who have money and can afford lawyers are able to navigate the system in a much better way, even if they are guilty. But so many people who are living in poverty who cannot afford an attorney, and also our cash bail system that we have here in the United States, where people are just put into county jails and can stay there for several years without even being found guilty of a crime, is also a travesty, just because they cannot have the financial means to post bail and get out of the system. So this is a problem. This is something that should not be going on in an advanced civilization that we have here in the US, at least allegedly. Michelle Alexander talks about the collateral consequences of conviction, where people who have been involved in the criminal justice system, when they actually end up coming home, they have been put into a second-class citizenship. So a lot of states, you are not able to vote when you come home from prison. You are not able to get certain types of licensure. You have difficulty finding employment because there's something where you very often have to check a box. Many of you, I'm sure, has filled out a job application where this little box that asks, have you been convicted of a crime? And lots of research also demonstrates where a vast majority of these, when people do check the box and they have a misdemeanor or felony conviction, these are just getting thrown away in the trash. People are not even getting an opportunity to kind of prove themselves that they have worth and that they want to contribute to society. There are over 40,000 collateral consequences of conviction in the United States, which are basically legal sanctions that allow for people who are formerly incarcerated to be discriminated against. And this is something that we allow in this country. We have, I believe it's over 70 million people in the United States that have had some contact at some point with the criminal justice system, whether that be an arrest, a conviction, probation, parole, etc. Many people have been touched by incarceration, and my assumption is a lot of you in this room, hopefully none of you have been incarcerated, but my assumption is many of you know someone who's been to jail. Maybe you have a family member that's been to prison, or you know someone who's been pulled over and arrested, maybe they were let out later. But this is something that touches all of us. It's not something that is isolated. Many people in the community is also indirectly affected by incarceration in many communities. So, a problem with people coming home from the penitentiary is they're very, as I mentioned, with these collateral consequences, they are set up for failure. So they have all these restrictions when they come home. If they're on probation or parole, it is very difficult for them to acclimate back into society, get a job, have financial means. Even having a form of identification is difficult to get. So you are kind of like in this endless cycle where you are just going back in and out of the penitentiaries. Recidivism rates, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is a big policy think tank that is out of the United States Department of Justice, looks at approximately in a 5-year period when people come out of the penitentiaries, roughly 3/4 of them go back within a 5-year period. So that's a lot. So that's basically just, again, this endless cycle. Incarceration is a cycle. It affects people's families. It affects their children. Children who have incarcerated parents are much more likely to become justice involved, whether it be juvenile justice or adult criminal justice systems. So this is very cyclical. It affects communities. It affects everybody on a very strong basis. So what do I do and how do I try to impact mass incarceration? I'm a professor here of criminology and criminal justice at the University of Michigan Dearborn, and I love my job. It's an incredible opportunity for me to be able to speak about the injustices of our criminal justice system and also empower my students to do something about it. My great-grandfather told me once that you don't really have a right in this country to bitch about a problem unless you're willing to stand up and do something about it. And he's a 90-year-old disabled vet who is one of the last World War II veterans, and I have a lot of respect for this man. And it's really great advice. Like, we have to think about things that we can do as a society. We can't just say that, you know, we're not directly affected by something. This is all of our problem. We are all culpable in a sense for the things that are happening through mass incarceration. So some of the things that I do as a part of my profession, my research looks at the phenomenology of incarceration. So I look at lived experiences of people who have been through the justice system, and instead of really an interpretation or analysis of that content, I just want to be able to describe that experience. So I interview people who were formerly incarcerated, or maybe talk to people who are in the juvenile or prison systems. And what is that like? What is that experience like? There's a lot of trauma that comes out of these experiences, and that trauma can be brought out of the prison system as well. And then that traumatic experience that people have faced gets put off onto their families, gets put off into the community. And as you've seen from previous slides with the recidivism rates, it is actually enhancing criminogenic factors, so people are becoming more likely to commit crimes because of these experiences that they've faced in the institutions. So here's a picture of some of my colleagues, and I say colleagues, these are actually students here at the University of Michigan Dearborn, but I see them as my colleagues because as a professor, I try to put myself on the same page with my students. I don't want to have this hierarchical structure where I'm above them or below them. I want them to collaborate with me, and I want them to understand and work with them in ways. So I take them on lots of different experiential trips. Here's an example of the Ohio State Penitentiary where we've done different field trips there. This is actually where the Shawshank Redemption was filmed. So students actually got to go into an empty prison block and an entire facility and kind of feel like what it's like to be incarcerated. So they're actually having that lived experience. And then I have myself and other speakers kind of like walk them through that process. What's it like to be trapped in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, 24 hours a day, with limited food, with isolation? And in fact, solitary confinement has been shown to like create all kinds of mental health problems. And in fact, it even can make people insane being in that type of environment. Here's another example. Out in the community, I want my students to be able to connect with law enforcement agencies as well. I'm kind of selfish in that I want to stack the deck a little bit, so I have the students that are going into, whether it be law enforcement, the judiciary, or corrections field, I want them to kind of humanize people who've been in the system. And I also want them to better understand the needs and responsibility of someone who is in law enforcement, for instance. So this is a field trip that we did to Monroe County Jail, which was an incredible experience for them to talk to different law enforcement officials, people that run the county jail, and they were able to see some people that are getting put in and out of the system as well. Why am I so passionate about this issue? So on the left, you see antique recognition of myself, a little bit thinner as well too. Here I am, 19 years old, my first year in the penitentiary. And on the right, as you can see, I'm dressed up and I'm a faculty member now. So my journey into the penitentiary was a very long-lived experience in which, as a child, I was exposed to so many different negative elements. I grew up in poverty. I never knew my father. My mother was bouncing around to different men in the community who were some of the most violent criminals out in the streets. And as a child, I became exposed to violence. Violence was pushed on me. I was abused as a child. Tortured. I've seen murders. My stepfather almost killed me once when I was an 8-year-old kid. And that has a way of transforming people I became, in my early teens, what I kind of hated as a young child. And that was, I became involved in criminality very heavily. I became hyper-masculine, I became aggressive, I became angry. And I actually committed violent acts against others, not to excuse my behavior, but to explain it in a certain sense, is that my experiences early on in life helped to transform me into that. I didn't have opportunities where a lot of people, where they come from privileged families, are able to get access to health care, for instance, a home. And I don't, by home I mean actually owning a home, not renting a property or going to different housing projects or apartments. I didn't experience these things. I went hungry as a child. My mother, again, bounced around to different places, and we never had a solidified experience where college, to me, all I knew about the University of Michigan as a young man was that we hate the Ohio State University, and anybody that's a Buckeye needs to get the hell out of there. That is my complete understanding of the university experience. So I never thought in a million years, one, that I would even go to college, let alone become a professor. So my journey has been really profound, and I'm excited that I'm at this point in my life. So my journey as a teenager, very violent, in and out of juvenile facilities. At the age of 18 was a pivotal moment that kind of brought me on the penitentiary journey. I was on a trip in Maine. I was actually on felony probation at that time. I get pulled over by law enforcement with my young girlfriend. We're both teenagers. I'm 18 years old. And a state trooper pulls up to my left, and me being the aggressive, violent man that I was and everything that I'm used to, I felt threatened. I have a cop that's right over here on my left coming up to my vehicle, and I react in a way that kind of changes my life forever. I pull out a gun, I fire out the window, and the trooper drops. And within seconds to the right, bullets start flying into my vehicle. And I feel like I'm in the Matrix. Time kind of stops. The back windshield gets blown out. Bullets go in the gas tank. Bullets go through my seat, lodge in the dash and different parts of the radio. We had tape decks back then. And this was 1997. Somehow, miraculously, I was not harmed. And all this happens within a few seconds. It's all on videotape. I take off on a high-speed chase. Later, thankfully, I find out also that the officer there that I shot at was not harmed as well. Nobody was harmed in this incident. I didn't get shot, my girlfriend didn't get shot, and neither of the troopers that were there were harmed as well. So I go on a high-speed chase. I end up getting a roadblock set up where a spike mat was thrown out, and end up stopping my vehicle. It's not like you see in the Fast and the Furious movies where, you know, the tires blow out and the car flips upside down and goes in slow motion and we kind of do this weird maneuver. But the tire slowly deflated and went down and started sparking, and I jumped a close field where I was at in the state of Maine, went towards the border of Canada where I seen a tree line. So me and my girlfriend are running, and I still have my gun on me. We're going through the woods at night, and long story short, the next day we come out. My girlfriend walks up to a road thinking that everything is good, peachy keen. So it's over now, and I'm like, yeah, right. They're totally like everywhere. I find out later 100 different law enforcement personnel were searching for us during this manhunt. Military, Canadian Mounties, local, state police, everybody, planes, helicopters, dogs, and they end up. Unmarked cruiser comes out. Me and my girlfriend are standing there, and I'm at another moment in my life. What am I going to do? What's my decision now? I have a loaded firearm in my pocket, and my girlfriend's right next to me, and I've got an officer pointing a shotgun at me, point blank range. I did the right thing. I gave up, put my hands up. They took me into custody. I ended up going to the county jail, and now I'm facing life in prison for the attempted murder of a state trooper. And to fast forward, like the experience of incarceration is extremely difficult. I spent time, probably half my time in solitary confinement, and this was just a horrific experience. This time I had in the system made me more violent. Programming is extremely limited. Isolation is a detriment to your mental health status. And eventually I went to trial. I lost at trial. I spent 1.5 years in the county jail. I ended up getting a 19-year sentence off to the state penitentiary. So my acclimation to prison was kind of easy because I already had a crime that was perceived as something that is honorable in the system. I was very violent, and that was able to make my transition easier, so I was more of a predator as opposed to prey. And a lot of the prisoners who were lifers immediately came up to me and gave me respect and started to mentor me. And the irony there is that I learned how to become nonviolent through people who have committed some of the most violent acts in society. Many of these men that mentored me were in there for murder, capital murder. And these men taught me the profound purpose of finding my way in life and looking at nonviolent ways to kind of contribute to society as opposed to take from it. So I started learning about law, public policy, and instead of fighting the system with physical violence, I filed all kinds of grievances, different types of litigation against the system where I felt there were injustices being held against myself and my fellow prisoners. I actually helped to start different religious groups inside. I started a Native American group that I was able to learn, which ties into the title of my presentation, Restoration Through Incarceration. I learned about restorative practices. I learned to become accountable for what I have done to society and try to repair that harm when I come home. And I helped to get other prisoners access to religious activities and group work. We started a group for Islam, Buddhism. We created an environment that was more inclusive while we were inside. Fast forward, as I came home, my last year in the penitentiary, I took a college course that's changed my life forever. And as I was released, I jumped right out. I only had to do approximately half my time in prison, so I did almost 10 years from the age of 18 to 28. I was paroled under a mandatory statute that allowed me to get released. And I went right into a community college. I did an awesome job, went in, got my bachelor's degree, my master's. All this time I struggled to find employment. But then I was given an opportunity not too long ago, was I got into a doctorate program where I started to teach at Western Michigan University. And eventually I was brought here by my boss, who I'll plug right now, Judge Donald Shelton, who recruited me to teach here at the University of Michigan Dearborn. So now I'm a professor. I go out and do public policy speaking. I do things to contribute to society. I work with people who've been formerly incarcerated, and I want to create safer neighborhoods. I want safe, smart policy. I want things that are able to improve everything for everyone, not just people who've been inside, but we need to have opportunities for people, or we're gonna end up just continuing this endless cycle. So I'll stop it there, and thank you very much.